Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Sheriff John Walker thought he had finally found peace, a secluded cabin by the river, far from chaos, far from rules. But when a ruthless HOA president and her private enforcers storm his land, claiming he's the trespasser, his dream retreat turns into a battleground. They picked the wrong man to intimidate. Sheriff John Walker had spent years dreaming of a peaceful retreat, a place where he could escape the stress of law enforcement and the noise of city life. After years of dealing with criminals, bureaucracy, and the never-ending tension of his job, he longed for solitude, somewhere he could fish with his son, grill steaks in the open air, and watch the stars without the hum of traffic in the background. When he finally found the perfect property, a secluded cottage nestled deep in the forest by a slow-moving river, he didn't hesitate. The house was modest but sturdy, with a large porch overlooking the water and an expansive backyard where his children could run free. Most importantly, it sat far beyond the reach of any homeowners association. No one would tell him what color to paint his shutters or how often to cut his grass. The property was his, and his alone. After finalizing the purchase and ensuring all legal documents were in order, John had been too busy with work to visit. Now, a month later, he was finally making the trip with his wife, Lauren, and their two children, 9-year-old Tommy and 5-year-old Emmy. As their SUV rumbled down the gravel road, the dense pine trees on either side created a canopy, filtering the golden sunlight. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they neared the property. The moment John stepped out of the car and took a deep breath of fresh, pine-scented air, a wave of satisfaction washed over him. This was what he had been working for all these years, a quiet place where his family could make memories away from the chaos of his day job. The first few hours felt like a dream. Tommy eagerly ran toward the riverbank, skipping rocks across the glassy surface, while Emmy chased butterflies in the tall grass. Lauren unpacked sandwiches and cold lemonade, setting up a picnic under the shade of an old oak tree. John fired up the grill, savoring the feeling of flipping burgers without his police radio crackling in the background. The weight of his badge, his duty, and the countless problems of the world seemed to vanish for a moment. Here he was just a husband and a father, enjoying a rare moment of peace. As dusk settled, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the treetops. The fireflies had just begun their slow dance when John noticed headlights cutting through the trees. His stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be out here. The only way to reach the property was through a long private road, clearly marked with a no trespassing sign. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up, its engine idling for a moment before the doors swung open. A group of people emerged. In front stood a tall woman with sharp, calculating eyes, dressed in a crisp blazer and tailored slacks. She carried herself with an air of authority, as if she owned the place. Behind her were 4 men in matching uniforms, black, tactical-style clothing, the kind designed to look intimidating. Their expressions were cold, professional. John's instincts, sharpened by years in law enforcement, kicked in. Something was off. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was an ambush. John stepped off the porch, his body instinctively shifting into a defensive stance as the group approached. The woman in the blazer stopped a few feet away, her expression a mixture of irritation and forced authority. Her sharp heels crunched against the gravel, and she folded her arms, surveying John with the confidence of someone who believed they had the upper hand. The men behind her remained silent, standing in formation like a private security detail. "You have exactly 5 seconds to explain what you're doing here." The woman snapped, her voice cold and clipped. "This property belongs to the Blackwood Estates Homeowners Association, and I don't recall granting anyone permission to squat on it." John's brow furrowed. HOA? That was impossible. He had deliberately purchased this property because it was not under the jurisdiction of any homeowners association. He had checked and double-checked the paperwork. Still, he kept his voice measured, his hands resting at his sides in a way that projected both calmness and control. "You're mistaken," John said evenly. "I bought this house last month. I have the deed, the title, everything. If you're confused, I can show you the paperwork." The woman scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. I know the owner personally, and he has not sold this property. Whatever fraudulent documents you have won't hold up in court." She took a step forward, her tone sharpening. "You're trespassing, And that's a crime. I strongly suggest you leave before we have to escalate this." John's jaw tightened. The arrogance in her voice set off alarms in his head. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This woman was trying to intimidate him. "Let me see some identification," he demanded. She let out a dry laugh. "I don't need to show you anything. I am Linda Grayson, president of the Blackwood Estates HOA. That's all the authority I need." She motioned to the men behind her. "And these are our enforcement officers. They handle matters like this when homeowners refuse to comply." Enforcement officers. John almost laughed. These men were dressed to look official. Tactical pants, boots, matching black shirts, but there were no badges, no official insignia. He had seen enough wannabe vigilantes in his career to know what he was looking at. "Those aren't law enforcement officers," John said coolly. "They're rent-a-thugs in matching outfits." The smirk on Linda's face vanished. One of her men lunged forward, gripping John's arm in a painful hold. "I'd suggest watching your mouth." John reacted instantly. In one fluid motion, he twisted his arm free, spun the man around, and locked him in a controlled hold, pressing his face into the dirt. The other three tensed, ready to jump in. Linda stepped back, startled. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screeched. "Defending myself," John said, tightening his grip on the man struggling beneath him. "I don't take kindly to people putting their hands on me. Now, I suggest you get the hell off my property before this goes somewhere you don't want it to." Linda's lips curled into a sneer. "You're making a huge mistake." She turned to her remaining men. "Arrest him." The three remaining enforcers charged at once, but John was faster. He threw a precise elbow strike into the first man's jaw, sending him sprawling. The second swung wildly. John ducked and drove a fist into his ribs, making him stagger. The third managed to get in close, grabbing for John's arm, but John used the man's momentum to flip him onto the ground. By the time John looked up, Linda was already backing away, her face pale. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a cell phone, pressing a button. "Fine," she hissed. "If you want to make this difficult, you leave me no choice." She put the phone to her ear and smirked. "Yes, I'd like to report an armed intruder. He's resisting arrest, attacking my security personnel, and trespassing on private property." John's stomach sank as he heard the confirmation on the other end. Linda had just called the police on him. John felt a surge of anger rise in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had dealt with manipulative liars before, people who twisted reality to suit their own agenda. But this was different. This wasn't some criminal on the street trying to worm their way out of an arrest. This was a power-hungry HOA president fabricating charges against him in his own home. Linda lowered her phone, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "They'll be here soon. And when they arrive, they'll see exactly what I told them. A violent man trespassing where he doesn't belong." John clenched his jaw. "I own this property, and you know it." Linda tilted her head in mock sympathy. "Oh, I don't think so. And even if you did," she waved a dismissive hand, "it won't matter once you're in handcuffs." Lauren appeared on the porch, panic etched across her face. "John? What's going on?" Behind her, Tommy and Emmy peeked out, their small faces full of fear. John's gut twisted. His kids were watching this. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could see the threat, feel the tension in the air. One of Linda's so-called officers recovered from the scuffle, pulling a baton from his belt. "You're resisting a lawful order," he growled. "You either come quietly, or we do this the hard way." John let out a sharp laugh. "You idiots have no authority, and if you so much as lift that baton at me, I'll make sure you regret it." Linda sighed dramatically. "Enough." She snapped her fingers. "Take him." Two of the men rushed forward before John could react. A stun gun crackled. Pain exploded through his body. His muscles locked up, his vision blurred, and for a split second he lost control. His knees hit the dirt. His mind screamed at him to fight back, but his body refused to obey. "Daddy!" Emmy's shriek cut through the air. Tommy ran toward his father, but Lauren grabbed him, holding him back. "Stay inside," she gasped, tears in her eyes. John fought to stay conscious, gritting his teeth against the electric current still buzzing through his limbs. He felt rough hands grab his wrists, forcing them behind his back. Cold metal snapped shut around them. They were actually handcuffing him. A sick wave of fury surged through him. He was a sheriff, a decorated officer, and these wannabe thugs were treating him like a criminal in front of his own family. Linda crouched beside him, her lips curling. "You really should have just left," she purred. "But don't worry, I'll make sure your family is taken care of while you're gone. Maybe I'll even help your wife find a buyer for this place. A real member of our community." John saw red. His family. His home. This woman had no limits. Lauren was sobbing now, clutching Emmy to her chest as the little girl screamed for her father. John took a slow, measured breath, forcing himself to push down the blinding rage. His body was still sluggish from the stun gun, but his mind was sharp. He wouldn't give Linda the satisfaction of seeing him break. The distant sound of sirens cut through the night. John exhaled, finally. The real police were on their way. Linda, however, just smiled. Showtime. The wail of sirens grew louder, their flashing lights cutting through the darkened treetops as the patrol cars barreled down the gravel driveway. The moment they skidded to a stop, uniformed officers spilled out, hands hovering over their holsters, scanning the scene with sharp, trained eyes. John forced himself to stay still, kneeling in the dirt with his hands cuffed behind his back. He could feel blood trickling from a scrape on his cheek where one of Linda's thugs had slammed him to the ground. His muscles still ached from the stun gun, but his mind was clear now. He just needed to let the truth unfold. The lead officer, Lieutenant Harris, stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The group of black-clad men posing as law enforcement, the terrified family on the porch, and finally, John himself. Then recognition dawned, his face twisted into shock. "Sheriff Walker, what the hell is going on?" Linda, undeterred, stepped in with practiced authority. "Thank God you're here, Lieutenant. This man is an armed trespasser. He attacked my security team and resisted arrest. We had no choice but to restrain him." John saw the exact moment Harris smelled the bullshit. The officer's gaze flickered between the trembling children on the porch, the stun gun still clutched in one of the enforcer's hands, and the way Linda's officers were suddenly shifting uncomfortably under real police scrutiny. Harris's expression darkened. "Uncuff him! Now!" Linda stiffened. "I don't think you understand. Now!" The weight of authority in Harris's voice was undeniable. One of the HOA enforcers hesitated, but ultimately obeyed, fumbling with the cuffs and pulling them free. John exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders as the blood rushed back into his wrists. The tension in the air shifted instantly. Linda, for the first time, looked uncertain. "Lieutenant, I don't understand. This man is—" "He's the sheriff," Harris cut in, his voice like steel. "And you? You and your officers just assaulted him." He turned to his men. "Arrest them." The panic on Linda's face was instantaneous. "What? You can't do that." The officers didn't hesitate. Handcuffs clicked into place as Linda and her men were forced to the ground, just as John had been minutes before. John finally stood, dusting off his jeans. He glanced at Linda, whose face was now contorted in disbelief and rage as her arms were wrenched behind her back. He leaned in just slightly and muttered, "You were saying?" For the first time all night, Linda had nothing to say. The courtroom was packed. News of the incident had spread like wildfire, drawing reporters, community members, and even some HOA residents who had long despised Linda's reign but had been too afraid to challenge her. Now, as she sat stiffly at the defendant's table in her neatly pressed suit, she no longer looked so untouchable. Her legal team had spared no expense. 3 high-powered attorneys flanked her, each exuding the confidence that came with obscene amounts of billable hours. The lead counsel, a sharp-faced man named Bradley Hewitt, stood as the judge entered, his every movement precise and controlled. John, seated at the prosecution's table, remained calm. His hands were folded, his face impassive. He had spent his career testifying in court. He knew how this game was played. Linda, however, was about to learn that money and arrogance weren't going to save her this time. "Your Honor," Hewitt began smoothly, standing before the jury. "This case is a gross misrepresentation of events. My client, Mrs. Grayson, was merely attempting to protect the integrity of her community when she encountered an unknown hostile intruder." He gestured toward John without looking at him. "She called for assistance, and in the resulting confusion, an unfortunate misunderstanding occurred. That's all this is. A misunderstanding being blown out of proportion by overzealous prosecution." John felt his jaw tighten. The audacity of this man. Hewitt continued, his voice dripping with sincerity. "Furthermore, my client was operating under the assumption that the property in question was still under HOA jurisdiction. She was misled by outdated records, which is a clerical error, not a crime. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The clerical error defense was flimsy at best. John watched the jury. Some of them frowned, unimpressed. The prosecution rose next. District Attorney Claire Hendricks was known for her brutal efficiency in dismantling weak defenses. She wasted no time. "Let's talk about that misunderstanding," she said coolly, pacing the courtroom. "Mrs. Grayson called 911 and lied about the sheriff of this county being an armed trespasser. She then ordered her men, unlicensed, unregistered security personnel, to use force against him, which resulted in him being unlawfully detained, restrained, and assaulted. That is not a misunderstanding. That is criminal intent." Linda shifted in her seat, but her expression remained tight. Hendricks turned to the jury, then signaled to the screen behind her. "And if there's any doubt about intent, let's hear the 911 call." A recording crackled to life. "Yes, I'd like to report an armed intruder. He's resisting arrest, attacking my security personnel, and trespassing on private property." Then her next words, clear as day. "Arrest him." Hendricks let the silence stretch before speaking. No hesitation, no confusion. Just a direct order to illegally detain a man who had every legal right to be there. Linda's lawyers scrambled. Hewitt stood, buttoning his suit jacket as he spoke. "That recording lacks context. My client was—" Hendricks cut him off with a raised hand. "You know what? Let's get more context." Another video began playing, this time the footage from John's security cameras. It showed everything. John flipping the first man onto the ground when they tried to grab him. The stun gun crackling against his body, his children screaming as he hit the dirt, convulsing in pain. The jury visibly tensed at the sight of the children crying. Then, the final blow, Linda standing over John, smirking as she taunted him about taking his home. When the video ended, silence hung in the air like a heavy fog. One of Linda's attorneys, a younger woman, visibly swallowed before speaking. "My client was misled about the nature of the situation. She was under duress and—" Hendricks slammed a thick folder of documents onto the table. "Oh, please. Misled. These are emails between Mrs. Grayson and her board members from weeks before the incident." She tapped a highlighted section. "Right here," she states, and I quote, "If he shows up, we will handle it. No paperwork will hold up against us." A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Linda's expression finally cracked. Her shoulders tensed, her fingers clutching the edge of the table. Hendricks turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution rests." The defense tried one last desperate move. Mrs. Grayson was acting in the best interests of her community, Hewitt insisted. "She has been a respected leader in Blackwood Estates for over a decade. Surely her long-standing dedication should be considered in sentencing." John, who had remained quiet, finally stood. He walked to the witness stand, his voice steady but ice-cold. "Respected leaders don't use violence to steal homes," he said. "They don't terrorize families. They don't lie to police to have a man tased and handcuffed in front of his kids." His gaze locked onto Linda's. "She's not a leader. She's a bully who got caught." The jury barely needed to deliberate. Guilty. On all counts. The judge delivered the sentence swiftly. 5 years for unlawful imprisonment, 2 years for aggravated assault, 1 year for filing a false police report, a total of 8 years behind bars. When Linda was led away in handcuffs, she didn't look at anyone. The woman who once thought she ruled her community was now just another convict. John had thought it was over, with Linda locked away for the next 8 years, and the HOA in shambles after multiple lawsuits from homeowners fed up with her tyranny. He had finally started to relax. He spent more time with Lauren and the kids, fixing up the property, making improvements. He even built a dock by the river and bought a small fishing boat, just like he had always planned. For the first time in years, life felt peaceful. That peace shattered with one phone call. John had just finished his shift when his phone buzzed. He barely glanced at the number before answering. "Walker, Sheriff," came the voice on the other end. "It was one of the deputies from the station, Hank, a longtime friend." His tone was tight, urgent. "John, it's your property, your house. It's gone." John's breath hitched. "What the hell do you mean? Gone?" "It burned down," Hank said, voice thick with regret. "Total loss." The fire department responded, but by the time they got there, it was too late. There's nothing left. For a moment, John could only stare at the wall of his office, his mind struggling to process the words. His home, the place where his kids played, where Lauren cooked breakfast every morning, where they had spent the past few months rebuilding their future, gone. He grabbed his keys, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. By the time John reached the property, the fire had been extinguished. All that remained of his house was a smoking skeleton of charred wood and ash. The smell of burnt timber filled the air, acrid and suffocating. Lauren stood nearby, clutching Emmy close while Tommy stared blankly at the ruins. His small fists were clenched at his sides, his face pale with shock. John walked toward them, his movements slow, heavy. Lauren's eyes were red-rimmed as she turned to him. "It was deliberate," she whispered. The fire chief said, "It was arson." John's hands curled into fists. Of course it was. His mind raced, already analyzing. The security cameras, he had installed multiple after the incident with Linda. If someone had been on his property, he would have them on tape. Back at the sheriff's office, John and his deputies huddled around a screen as the security footage loaded. The first few hours were quiet, the usual wildlife appearing on camera, deer, raccoons, a stray fox. Then at 3:17 a.m., movement. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, dressed in dark clothing, faces covered. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the house. 2 carried gasoline canisters. John's grip on the desk tightened. 1 figure stayed back, acting as a lookout. The others began dousing the walls and porch with gasoline. Then came the moment that made John's blood freeze. One of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, with short, light-colored hair, turned slightly toward the camera. John knew him. He had seen that man before, one of Linda's so-called security officers. The bastard had been there that night, helping to restrain him, following Linda's orders like a loyal dog. He wasn't the one who lit the fire, but he stood there, watching. John slammed his fist onto the desk. "Get me everything on that son of a bitch," he ordered. The deputies scrambled into action. Within the hour, they had an ID, Kevin Rhodes, a former security contractor, multiple minor offenses for trespassing, intimidation, even a bar fight that got him fired from a private firm. John leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just some random attack. This was payback. And there was only one person with a reason to orchestrate something like this: Linda. Even from behind bars, she was still trying to destroy him. Tracking down Rhodes wasn't difficult. His arrogance worked against him. He was still in town, cocky enough to think that if he hadn't physically started the fire, he wouldn't be in trouble. John walked into the interrogation room, the door clicking shut behind him. Rhodes sat at the table, slouched back, arms crossed. "Sheriff," he said lazily, smirking. "Hell of a night you had." John's stomach burned with rage, but his face remained unreadable. "You were there," John said calmly. "You didn't start the fire, but you were there, which means you know who did." Rhodes chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't know what you're talking about." John slid a folder onto the table, opened it. Inside, high-resolution images from the security footage, clear as day. Rhodes' smirk vanished. "I bet your 2 buddies will flip on you real quick," John said smoothly, leaning in. "But if you tell me who ordered this, I can make things easier for you. Maybe cut down your sentence. Maybe even get you a deal." Rhodes hesitated. John saw it. The fear. The realization that he was screwed. Finally, Rhodes exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It was her," he muttered. "Linda." John's chest tightened, but he already knew. "She sent word from inside," Rhodes continued, voice lower now. "Told us you needed to learn a lesson. Said your house shouldn't even exist. Told us to make sure you'd have nothing left." John leaned back. He had his confession. Now it was time to finish this. The next day, John personally led a team of officers into the state prison. Linda was seated in the visitors area, looking just as smug as ever. That smugness evaporated the second she saw John's uniformed officers behind him. "Linda Grayson," John said, his voice cold and sharp. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, attempted destruction of property, and ordering a violent crime from behind bars." Linda's face drained of color. "What? That's ridiculous. I've been in prison this whole time." John tossed a set of documents onto the table. Signed statements, video evidence, everything. "Not ridiculous," he said. "Proof." The guard stepped forward, snapping a new pair of handcuffs onto her wrists. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I was set up. This is a mistake." John watched as she was dragged away, her screams echoing down the hallway. Her original 8-year sentence? Now, It would be 20. Linda had finally lost everything. Months passed, and John slowly rebuilt what had been taken from him. The new house stood stronger than before, reinforced with security systems, cameras, and the knowledge that no one would ever take his home from him again. The scars of the past lingered, memories of the fire, of Linda's arrogance, of the moment he saw his children crying as he was dragged away in handcuffs. But in the end, justice had prevailed. Linda Grayson was now serving a 20-year sentence in a maximum security facility. Her once powerful reign over Blackwood Estates had crumbled. The HOA had been dismantled, its remaining members either resigning in disgrace or facing lawsuits of their own. The community, finally free of her grip, had come together in her absence. The very people she had ruled over with an iron fist were now helping each other rebuild. John sat on the edge of the newly built dock, staring out at the river. The sun was setting, casting golden hues over the water, turning it into liquid fire. Tommy and Emmy sat beside him, their legs dangling over the edge, little ripples forming as their feet brushed against the surface. Lauren stepped out onto the porch, watching them. There was peace in her eyes, something that had been missing for months. Tommy turned to his father, squinting against the sunset. "Dad, do you think she's mad? That she lost?" John smirked, exhaling slowly. "Oh, she's furious." He ruffled Tommy's hair. "But it doesn't matter anymore." He looked back at the river, the same river that had first drawn him to this place. It was still here, still flowing. No fire, no corrupt HOA, no amount of greed or malice had been able to take it away. This was home, and it always would be.